Welcome to the 500 Mind Podcast. I am your host, Shane Hazen. Coming up in this episode, I'm joined by the editor of Bleeding Cool website, Rich Johnston. We're talking The Show and Alan Moore's cinema. Alan Moore, the comic book writer of Watchmen, From Hell, V for Vendetta, probably my favorite writer of all time, as I mentioned in the episode, has had his first screenplay produced in a possessory credit along with the director Mitch Jenkins. After making a cycle of short films, The Show, his first feature film. But first, what I watched this week, really only one title I want to talk about, The Misfits, the John Huston film, which most film historians will talk about in terms of it being Marilyn Monroe's last movie, which is what has scared me off from ever getting around to watching it, just because you have all these stories about Marilyn Monroe a year away from dying, and the film having to stop midway through. So you just assume the movie's a mess. And even with John Huston, that is not the case. I finally watched it for the first time. And one of the really cool things about it is it's written by Arthur Miller, even though for Marilyn Monroe historians, their marriage was dissolving by this point. But it's a screenplay written by Arthur Miller in a very late 50s American existentialist mode, but written so directly for Marilyn Monroe. And I'm trying to think of other Marilyn Monroe dramatic parts. Like, she's played such a femme fatale Moll. She was in All About Eve and Asphalt Jungle. But this movie in particular, it has a great writer writing a loving part for his actress wife, and it comes across. The key exchange in here, which I feel like has been recited ad infinitum, when I came to it, I didn't know it was coming. It's a scene between Monroe and Clark Gable's character. It's also Clark Gable's last finished film, and Clark Gable says, to Marilyn Monroe, "You are the saddest girl I've ever known," and Marilyn Monroe says, "Oh, because most men think that I'm really happy." And Clark Gable says, "No, that's because you make men happy. They think that." And that's not the exact quote, but that is the spirit of the film. And there's just, I'm not gonna lie. It's again, there's that late 50s, early 60s Hollywood trying to use European existentialism and trying to have a foreign film feel to it. And John Huston really does line up the proceedings. Clark Gable's stunt work in it is amazing, but Marilyn Monroe's performance I was unprepared for and amazed by. So on this episode, we're discussing Alan Moore, the comic book writer, who throughout his career, a lot of his comic book work has been, even though he's arguably one of the greatest creators in the comic book medium, his comics as a writer has been called very cinematic. A lot of that because at his earliest his first decade, really in the 80s of being a creator, he pushed the 9-panel grid, which feels like oftentimes like sometimes like a static shot. He also has a technique where he shows the same thing over and over and shows the motion going within it. Because the big difference between comics and film is that even though if you go back to the Scott McCloud definition, technically celluloid is a comic just because it's 24 frames of successive sequential art. One thing Alan Moore always makes a distinction between is that when those 24 frames play per second, time is controlled in a different way, whereas by the creator, and in a comic, time is controlled by the reader. And that leads to a certain, I frequently use the term maximalism with Alan Moore. Like, I feel like Alan Moore really got to me at an early age as a reader and introduced me to a lot of these impressively overly researched, deep, detailed comics where they seemed perfectly readable in the moment, but once you step back after having finished them, you were impressed that a human mind could come up with this. The most obvious version of this is if you read from Hell, his Jack the Ripper series with Eddie Campbell, which we talk about. Rich Johnston and I talk about the adaptation of later in this episode. Each chapter has a appendix where it shows the amount of research he put into it and how much literal dialogue he used from like overheard bystanders in the late 1800s in London. And sometimes modern day Moore especially has been kind of show offy of this research because it's so daunting. His work helps for be reread. But he's always been talked up his entire career, mainly during the 80s, the cinematic influence. And since I read him as a teenager, what he talked about, or these creators he talked about influencing him, were people I looked into. It was really odd to come across the editorial finesse of a director like Nicholas Roeg through a comic book creator. But one of the most daringly nonlinear editor directors, Nicholas Roeg started as a cinematographer. If you look at the Dr. Manhattan stuff in Watchmen, or just how Alan Moore in his work tend to look at time as a fourth dimensional, all things happening at once, it really had an interesting approach to when you took on film. So all this is also going around the point of Alan Moore started getting adapted, which is a big chunk of the episode, very badly. He most of his movies took his very complex execution of these big complex ideas, and would pare them down to their most stupid, obvious core. And one of the critiques of Alan Moore as a creator is that he hadn't actually created a lot of this stuff. A lot of what he's done himself is involved, brings a lot of creativity to older IP. Watchmen was based off the Charlton characters. Miracle Man, Marvel Man, Swamp Thing. A lot of his other works are a very thin pastiche with a meta commentary on it, but it doesn't also take away from how much joy and reverence he would bring to these subjects. All this goes to say that I've been waiting a long time for him to work on film, and he did a cycle with Mitch Jenkins that started out as a burlesque short that Alan Moore then wanted to write, help out write. That turned into this cycle. It started with a short film, Act of Faith, then Upon Reflection, Jimmy's In, A Professional Relationship, and His Heavy Heart. And then this turned into basically prequels for the feature film we're going to talk about, The Show, which Rich also points out is Alan Moore has written the pilot of and has plotted out 5 seasons worth of a television show for. Now, the thing I love about Alan Moore's work is his mastery of the comic medium and knowledge of how art affects us and makes illusions for us and what stories do to us. And I feel like a TV show might be a fertile playground for Alan Moore and Mitch Jenkins to gain a mastery of the film medium, which this is not to take away from the show. The show is in many ways a really light, fun distillation of a dark universe. That's as Rich points out, the cycle is very dark, and the movie is very funny, which means that this could be all things to all people, hopefully, if it ever gets made. Anyway, on with this episode. You were the one. It was in 2006 in your Lighting the Guthers article where you had the. I remember where I was when I read the article about Alan Moore coming out against the V for Vendetta movie.
Yeah, that was a hell of an interview. Actually, Joe, I'm going to start recording now because you might be never know.
Okay.
But yeah, that was a hell of an interview. That was it was a bunch of stuff. It was actually being turned down by a rival reporter because they didn't want to annoy DC Comics, and so he pulled his basically his name off V Vendetta, off all the films, anything at all. He did all that kind of stuff. He dissociated himself from the movies. He announced his new book, Jerusalem, which he was just starting.
I forgot about that. I do remember that. That was the
and
first mention.
he also announced his marriage, all in one go. So
Wow.
that was that at the time that was the biggest article in terms of traffic that had ever run on comic book resources.
So wait, how many times have you actually interviewed Alan Moore?
I've interviewed him once,
Okay.
properly once. I've met him a few times, but actual interview, that was the once.
Okay.
I've called him a few times and asked a question if there's been something here and there. But a proper interview, that's only happened the once. Usually when we at Bleeding Cool have an Alan Moore interview, A.D. Tantamed is the usual guy to go to for Bleeding Cool. He's known Alan a lot more than I do. So.
Okay. Well, part of the reason I've been reading you for years is I feel like there's a kindred spirit in that. For me, in many ways, even though this is technically a movie podcast, Alan Moore for me is kind of, if you ask me at any given point since I've been an early teenager and started reading post puberty, who my favorite writer is, it might have changed a little throughout the years, but for the most part, it's been consistently Alan Moore. And he's just kind of been a morning star for me, and I get the sense a little that's from you too. I always love on Bleeding Cool whenever I notice you call something the Watchmen of I May Destroy You or Tom King's Vision. You're like, this is the new Watchmen. Like that's your highest praise.
Well, it's more like what is this mean? What is this intending to do? This is doing things that Watchmen was trying to do. That's probably more of it. There's like an ambition, I think. Yeah. So there's definite praise, not so much even if it's something to achieve, actually really trying to move things, push things, change things, and that was what Watchmen was.
Yeah.
So there are a few, and sometimes there's a few like surface similarities which are handy to grab onto.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought I May Destroy You was a good example of that. Someone trying to do something new with television, and with a whole bunch of different tools, and also the fact that it was 12 episodes long, it helps.
Yeah, well, there's also that maximalist trying to get everything in, but also feeling like all the details matter and that the creator knows all the details.
Yes, absolutely, definitely.
So I guess we should start off just trying to go through Alan Moore's history with the movies, which when I go through his IMDb, there's a credit on there I didn't recognize at all from 1983 called Ragnarok.
Yes, now that I think wasn't that an adaptation that has done of his? I remember that being anything that existed.
He's got a story credit on it.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. I think it was something that was adapted with his kind of blessing, but it was like a video release thing. It's like direct to video.
Okay.
Do you know what? I haven't seen it. I don't think it's particularly well regarded, but it was something done that was fine.
Okay, I think not well regarded is going to be a theme of a lot of the early stuff for this.
But again, this was something that Alan actually signed up to. I think it was something like, yeah, of course you can adapt my thing as a little video. That was never an issue with him. I don't think. That's what I seem to recall. I think that was it. I'd have to check, but yeah.
And another theme of this, as we go further into it, the timeline, is how much Alan Moore was okay with this for a while until gradually, one by one.
Well, he hadn't been worn down by the inexorable creep of the whole thing. And when having to meet movie people, and then there was the deposition at Fox just off of Soho Square, I think, for many hours over the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen cast of characters lawsuit. And I think once that all kind of adds in, with also his despair at movies and movie making in general, it definitely turned him against the process. Even Terry Gilliam doesn't think you can make Watchmen. I mean, can anyone? So there was that aspect too.
So I guess the movie people really started courting him after the big '86 Renaissance, and mainly Watchmen was the first real property, and Gilliam was one of. It seems like they met a few times and talked about it, at least.
I think so. Yes. I mean, they're again, one might even see them as kindred spirits. So yes.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you talk about? Do you know much about how far Moore got on? Wasn't he supposedly offered the RoboCop sequels before Frank Miller was?
Well, he was offered it. I believe he turned them down, but I believe he was actually. That was definitely an offer was made to him, and I don't think he was interested. I believe that's correct.
And the same would have
And
been
certainly
for
Frank
like the
Miller
Silver
was.
Surfer movie too, right?
No, see, now that I don't know. I'd have to check that one. I don't know that one. I do remember the RoboCop one specifically, and I guess you can see, because those are the sequels. You can see what actually did happen to Frank Miller's script as evidence that he was right about that as well. I don't know this other stuff. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Alan will have been offered a lot, and we probably don't know most of them. And mostly to be case like someone ringing him up and him saying no.
Okay.
But that has happened a lot.
Were there any other movies that popped up around this time that you know of? Besides, I mean, we're going to get to Fashion Beast here in a second,
I was
but
about to say Fashion Beast. Not that I know of. Again, it would be people. This is a time when comic book writing wasn't even well regarded, even someone like Alan Moore. So
right.
if anyone was going to do a film, it would be an adaptation of his kind of thing. So let's take your thing and we'll get a real writer to turn it into a film. So that would,
Right.
I'm sure, have been the discussion back then. And then when things like Watchmen and things would happen, it's like, oh well, maybe we get this comic book writer to do a screenplay, and then we can fix it. We can change it and make it work. And maybe there'll be some good ideas in there. Because what you also start to see was then fans of his start to move up through the echelons of Hollywood. And this is often the way this happens. There's so many big movements in Hollywood that basically is what the people in charge liked 10, 20, 30 years ago. And you can suddenly see the emergence of things like, I don't know, well, actually things like the Marvel, the MCU, or things like the Transformers movies, or the Turtles movies. There's a certain moment where the people in charge were 8 when they loved them, and now they're in charge and they get to play. And they get to. I don't know if you've read Ethan Dawkins' Eltingville.
Not, I think I may have read like the first issue a long time ago.
He did a recent revisiting of these characters as they've now grown up, and one of them has now just got a job at, I think it's DC Comics, and is about to start doing all his terrible fan theories, and he's going to make them all canon. And everyone's just like, oh, just heads in their hands about this. Oh, why are you caught? But and a few people you can point to and say, well, that's clearly what happened. So I think that's true, very much true in Hollywood. There's a cultural lag, maybe about 30 years between where somebody was a young teenager really liked something, and then when they're in their early 40s and they get to green light things, and you sort of get these echoes, these cultural echoes go through society. And I think to some degree that might have been a bit faster with Alan, but there was definitely the idea of people who liked his stuff 5 years ago now being in a position where they can say, right, let's hire him for a thing.
Well,
and Alan not really interested.
I was reading one of the interviews where he was from like 2006, where he was describing why he was trying to explain taking his name off, leaving all this stuff, and one thing that kept hitting me over and over. It's really in the 80s too, but also then is just like if he had like a big Hollywood agent, which anyone would recording him now would have at the time, none of this would have happened. It feel like everything he was asking for was completely and utterly reasonable.
Absolutely. Of course, the comic book publishers didn't do agents. It wasn't a thing. I mean, it is now. It's certainly much more now, but it wasn't a part of the conversation. It was something you'd expect it to do because these were comics.
Yeah.
I mean, at the best, they could be considered akin to like magazine articles rather than novels. So, I mean, you're not really going to get agents for that kind of thing. You're not going to get agents for comics. Agents wouldn't even take it. It's not something that people would do. This has now changed. And I think on Bleeding Cool recently, where I've basically been looking at all the graphic novel sales in the last couple of years to big publishers. And I sorted them by agent. So you could see exactly which the agents who were selling graphic novels into publishers. And I know that quite a few people have used that list. And I would like to apologize to some of the agents who have sold a lot of graphic novels on that list, because I know you've had a lot of calls. So apologize for that.
I guess it just bugs me just because also it goes to what you're speaking earlier, that comic book writers, it took the generational switch for like they had the respect for Hollywood to come calling, or as the last 15 years have showed us that they can make money for these people too.
Absolutely, but but the idea that you can actually make money out of this now is, I mean, let's be fair. There was a certain surge in the comic book inspired movies in the very early 80s, and then you get another one towards the late 80s. But really, most comic book films of that period, probably apart from Superman and Batman, lost money huge amounts. They did very poorly. It was only the very exceptional version with basically the very, very best known superhero names that did any business. Every single time they came along, it was another punt. I mean, you remember when Superman movies came through, you had a spate then, and they all did terribly, including some of the subsequent Superman movies. And then when the Batman movies came along, you had another spate. You probably had Blade, but again, most people didn't realize that was even based on a comic book. It only really changed when you had when you think you had things like Spider-Man doing well, but again, you didn't see other people able to make the money at the same time. Things like Mystery Men didn't do well, all that kind of stuff. It was only when the MCU was the one that said everything else is not an exception. This can now be the rule. And at that point, pretty much most superhero movies, from wherever they come from, and a lot of comic book movies have done well. It's expanded the lexicon, so now a lot more comic books from all different genres have been used, picked up, and played with in various different ways. Every time it's been an exception until the last 10 years, and now it's the rule that everybody always knew. Of course, they were always going to do well.
Yeah.
And now it's it's very good with hindsight, but usually it was the exception that a comic book movie would do well.
If you read Alan Moore interviews, though, going into especially with his first decade really of writing, the number of times, part of the thing that I've heard James Robinson talk about this before, that the whole renaissance in the mid '80s really came because it was these comic book people bringing in outside influences, and Alan Moore talks a lot. He has some very specific film references he constantly would bring up. He would bring up Nicholas Rowe. He would talk about Robert Altman's Secret Honor, or it was clear that as the years go on and he's talked about movies, he's kind of said, he's like, I'm not sure I'm a big fan of the medium, but it was clear earlier on that he was bringing in a lot more to the table, which is why I've always been curious what his films would look like.
Well, I mean, he was kind of like a young man in his 20s then. Remember, I mean, now he's a slightly older man in his 60s, so he's seen a lot.
You mentioned the other day his birthday.
Yes,
yes.
He's seen a lot more terrible films now than he did back then. He's so there's also the idea you can get a little bit jaded over time may also be an aspect there. You're right. I mean, if you want, I say. I pretty much. I mean, okay, there was some issue. I'm sure there was some issues with budget and code and the like, but actually not COVID, but budget. But things like, I mean, the show is out there. You can see what an Alan Moore film looks like.
Yeah.
And that's that may be the closest you'll get.
Let's go, before we get to the show, let's go ahead and talk about Fashion Beast. So it was the Sex Pistols manager was the one that instigated this.
Malcolm, yes, absolutely, and that was it's a strange project that exists because every now and then Alan Moore, as you will know, does things that people go, what? And sometimes it's just for the challenge, sometimes it's to do something interesting that no one's expecting. Sometimes it's for the money, and whatever reason, he will put out a thing, and that's one of those things. It was working. Fashion Beast was working with the idea of a punk and fashion icon, even though there may be some dodgy aspects there as well. And it was you could especially see all this stuff that Alan had been thinking about, or watching, or learning, or looking at, or a lot of his art, the art background there, very much just kind of like coagulated into this kind of horrific, let's go with creature or beast, but it was definitely a coalescence, I think, of a lot of ideas and things that he'd seen, the way he looked at culture, the way he looked at fashion, the way he looked at the people behind it, and it all kind of like coagulated into this beast. It could well have been unfilmable. It's not a film that I'm sure many directors would like to take on because it's insane. And all credit to Anthony Johnston and the guys at Avatar Press for the comic book adaptation together, because that pretty much was what the film was. I mean, if you read that, it's definitely that's the film, and I can't see how it would work as a film, but there we go. It worked quite well as a comic.
Yeah, I read the script years ago, but I remember another recurring thing for me is even though he's one of my favorites, the maximalism with Moore always it's hard to get into it, and once you get over a hump, I immediately embrace it and find it more fulfilling. But usually it's a little daunting, and the ambition is sometimes a little intimidating. Someone reading the formatting on it is like it's 177-page script, and it's Alan
Yeah.
Moore. Alan Moore scripting is kind of notorious for being very lengthy and detailed, and the screenplay format is, for lack of a better word, not.
No, it's absolutely that was definitely a one would say a clash of approaches. But again, there's no reason the screenplay format has to be that.
Yeah,
It
no, totally,
classically is, but that
absolutely.
again, that's also a product of the Hollywood system. What you now think of as a screenplay is something that's been created and crafted through the industry. There's no reason it actually has to look like that at all. It's just that's the way it's expected to look,
Hmm.
and the brevity of descriptions and all that kind of stuff. Now, clearly, Alan wasn't having any of that. He wanted something else. But again, there's no reason why I've seen film. Yeah, there were film scripts of produced full feature films that have been written that I've seen in handwriting, scribbled on paper.
Hmm.
I've seen the days before all the different rushes of versions of the scripts. I've seen film scripts that were rewritten on the fly with pen and ink as they're going, and
Yeah.
you just get a big mess. So and of course most films aren't created on the screenplay at all. As you will know, most films are created in the editing suite using whatever the hell they can get their hands on.
Hmm.
So there's no particular reason why the classic film script has to be that way. It's just the machine, the industry knows how to deal with that. I mean, comic book scripts didn't look like Alan Moore comic scripts before Alan Moore started writing them.
That's a very good point. That's a very
And
good point.
so many people now do an Alan Moore script. But he kind of like, he already transformed one medium. Why not try and have a go at another? Maybe that's the approach. I can see the issues people might have had with it, and definitely, but again, it's not from a lack of ambition.
No, not for a lack of ambition. I've had this pet theory for a long time that comparing the writer, penciler dynamic in comics and to movies is actually more similar to the writer director dynamic. The only difference is that the director has a massive uh, uh, power dynamic difference there, where the director has all the power and the writer has none. Whereas in comics, it's a little more balanced, but when it comes to the actual creativity, like there's a lot more overlap. This is just a pet theory of mine. I don't know if you.
Yeah, well, I do. There is definitely some overlap, but the artist is partially director and also the cinematographer and the set designer and the casting agent, and there's where to some degree the writer is obviously there's a director role, but is close to the producer.
Mm,
So he's saying all these things I want to be in there, but the person who's actually doing it gets to make the decisions. So he said, I want this room, is it whatever. So I think it's much more of a producer role, I would say, than it is in movie terms.
that's
So
that's that's
writer
why I
producer,
said director, just because directors at the end of the day responsible for actually getting this stuff on screen and producing it, and then their name is on whether it's successful or not too, or it looks
yeah.
right or not. That's
I would say the artist is closer to the director and the writer is closer to a producer director, to a producer writer director. I would say that's if I was doing it, but
okay.
I'm not defining these terms.
Okay. Fashion Beast. I would say like I don't. I read the script a long time ago, but I reread the comic and prep for this,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a part of me that thought that just because of certain issues it was dealing with, like I mean, it's kind of like a trans Beauty and the Beast was the way they were selling it, and some of the stuff like has aged pretty well. It would be pretty intriguing to see
Oh
someone
yeah,
try to make it today.
I mean I think that's Alan's work generally seems to have done. There's certain aspects of it you think, oh, that might be a bit dodgy nowadays, but I don't think so. I think they generally things have been well thought through, and he could justify pretty much every creative decision.
Mm.
In the way that some, I guess, his contemporaries, their work doesn't quite have that, doesn't hold together quite as well. So yes, absolutely. Basically, it's one of these things where you think, oh, I hate all these politics, all these woke politics in comic books, and it's like, you read Alan Moore. I mean, he's been thinking this kind of stuff for a very long time. And he's got all sorts of interesting things worked out in his head. And, you might not agree with it in certain ways, but certainly he's thought things through, I
This
would
is
say.
this is
And yeah,
why you get a
absolute
visionary
specialist.
label by that, just because you have thought things through. And yeah, so do we want to start to go to the rest of the actual adaptations? I guess From Hell's the first one. When's the last time you watched From Hell?
Yeah, now that is one, of course, that Alan agreed to. That's when he signed up. He hasn't taken his name off that. He still gets the money from that because that's something he actually agreed to. And it's a weird because it's an interesting film. It literally does the opposite of the comic book. In the comic book is a why done it, and the movie is a who done it.
Yes.
And if you've read the comic book, you've spoiled the film for yourself in many ways, because you relies on a twist that you already know. Whereas I think a closer adaptation of the film might have gone in a different direction, certainly, but it might have kept that idea that we know who he is, and we're exploring the mind of the serial killer, whereas that's lost, really.
Yeah.
You're much more exploring the mind of a drugged up detective kind of stuff, which, you know, it's got much more of that kind of I guess Conan Doyle aspect to it than is Alan Moore. But I think it's an interesting film. I like the way it shows a certain society, a certain kind of I guess a kind of gang culture, to a world which you typically think of being much more refined. So all that kind of stuff is fun. And of course they grab certain lines willy-nilly from the book, and then let's just throw in a new one because that sounded cool. So in no way is it representative of the comic book, but I think it's quite fun in its own right.
Okay.
And not adaptations work.
I see that you put your finger on the who done it, the why done it aspect from an adaptation standpoint. That has always seemed so egregious to me. That was the one that I was first started like, I'm not sure these adaptations are gonna work. I haven't watched it since it was in theaters.
I mean, one of the things that works, if you see the film and you then pick up the comic book, you'll then get a totally new, different experience. You can't, nothing. It starts where the film finishes almost. So you know so you're going to get a different story. So, you know, maybe it works as a positive recruitment. They've certainly sold a lot of books. Eddie Campbell is very grateful for the film because when he self-published From Hell for a while. I remember he was telling me a story of at one point having, as he put it, his entire life savings being kept in a couple of large trucks, lorries, going through various mountains, and at any point if they fell into the sea, that was it, he was gone. But no, they came through and it did fine. And then of course top shelf picks up later. So yeah, and to be fair, I mean, you know, a lot of what Eddie Campbell has done since is very much that the house that From Hell built. So and a lot of that was down to sales inspired by the film. People went out and bought that book because you could, again, it's one of these things with the film to comic to film adaptations, is often they don't affect the comic book sales an iota. But in certain books, when it's like, there is a thing, here is the thing, you've seen that thing, here is the thing, there's no more, you don't have to collect any more, there's no spin-offs, whatever, this is the thing. That can really drive sales.
Okay.
And they got a good deal. I mean, it was being self-published by Eddie, that was always going to be a good deal. And then through Top Shelf, again, a good deal. So they've done very well from Hell sales that the film inspired.
And the Hughes brothers are good filmmakers. I think it was the foundation. It was just such a foundational like switch up the whole point of the book was always threw me off. But you've made me rethink. Maybe this is a good thing in the world. But should we move on to League now?
Well, now see that is weird because League is really interesting, and I think part of it is the legal case. Because I did actually have this discussion with Alan back then, because I got called up by some of the legal counsels because the stuff I'd written about when it was League of Extraordinary Gentlefolk, I'd written online of the Usenet news groups because it went back quite a while, and they were asking me about that because that would have predated Cast of Characters screenplay being written, and I was writing about this future plan for Alan Moore, so it was a nice smoking gun that they could say, look, how can this person say this in this year when this film, so it was already being planned. So I have a tiny little I guess I have a witness statement for that, I think, because and I need to be careful how I say this because I don't want to cause any problems with anyone.
Okay.
The film, so League of Gentlemen, for my mind, had quite a few similarities with the screenplay Cast of Characters, but those similarities were not with the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic book. So some of the people who appear in the film who are not in the comic book, but who are in that Cast of Characters screenplay. So I can see potentially something that might have happened along that way, where someone says, "Oh, Tom Sawyer, Dorian Gray, this is all quite fun," and I don't know if there was actually any kind of jump from one to the other, but it just wasn't from the comic book, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and the film. And some of those stuff, I actually think they're quite idea. I love the idea of Dorian Gray as an immortal kind of creature who can't be hurt, can be heard. I thought that kind of thing was fantastic, and not knowing the comic book whatsoever. but it's just not a good film. I mean, there's
Okay.
certain aspects of it that I love. I mean, things like I love the Jekyll and Hyde. The look of that, the way that appears on the screen. Justin Fleming playing both of his characters, thought was fantastic. I mean, Sean Connery would have been a great Alan Quartermain. That seems fantastic. But there's just it also it fights against it. It keeps bringing in aspects that seem to fight against the actual point of the film. They shouldn't, actually having cars going around Venice. It just felt too much like you want something else. You want a different film. You've got this comic book. It's been bought, and again, it's one of those things. He hasn't taken his name off it. It was bought.
Yeah.
It was all properly done. It's just the film they made wasn't. It just feels very unsatisfying. There are aspects of that film that I really enjoy. Some because they replicate what the comic book does. Some because they go off on their own journey and do their own things. But as a film, as a whole film, it's just very disappointing.
I know. When I watched it, I made the mistake of I was still working in a movie theater at the time, and we watched it late at night, and I brought all the first 6 issues and read them right before we watched it. And yeah, I just remember immediately, oh, that was just a terrible mistake. And I would mention it to friends days after, like, oh yeah, that's what I did, and they're like, they gave me the traditional adaptation argument of like, oh, the book's always better than the movie, or some variant on that. And that's not always true. Sometimes there are ways that adaptations can complement each other in good ways. But there's things where I really feel for Alan Moore, just because those first 2 especially just didn't seem like they didn't respect the source material like at all. And you question, why were they made in the first place?
It's, maybe it was actually an adaptation of cast of characters with a few lines of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen thrown in. I don't know. But you're right. Like I said, there were some genuine moments in there that I really will watch again. I will watch it. I will fast forward to the bit that I like. I will watch that bit, and I will fast forward to the end and then leave it again. Okay. If it's something, I've just definitely done that before. In fact, I've done that with quite a few films. Some Alan Moore adaptations, some not. But it does seem such a missed opportunity, because there's no reason why it couldn't be. And also, we're talking about, you could absolutely adapt that as a concept and have nothing to do with the comic book itself, and it would be fine. The idea of taking a whole bunch of characters from different media to create a different dynamic, in this case, like replicating the superhero team in the 19th century, is a fun way to do it. But you could do it with anything. I remember when Fox bought an option at some point for a TV series based on it. It didn't go anywhere. But the idea that you could actually just take a whole bunch of Fox properties from their TV shows, from their films. You could have Radar from MASH, you could have Doc Brown from Back to the Future, and just put them all in the same thing and call it the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. You could do that, and that would be fun. That would be an adaptation that has nothing to do with the comics, but it might take one of the really fun ideas and aspects of the film and adapt it that way. So there's things you could do.
Or it'll end up in a Space Jam movie.
Yeah, there is that. So it's just fraught with danger. That is definitely true. But there are all sorts of ways one can do it. I'm not in any way saying you have to be accurate you have to be as accurate to the script as possible.
Of course.
But I like the idea of being accurate to the reason you liked it, the reason it was good, and try and replicate that. That would be a great way to do it if you were to do it. And maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. I'm quite ambivalent about it. If it's a good film, it's a good film. I'll enjoy that. But if it's not, it's like, oh, why bother? Why ruin that? But again, it sold a lot more copies of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen books that would not have otherwise sold. So more copies of the comic in the world, I think, has.
Before this point, I had seen Alan Moore mention in multiple times in interviews the Raymond Chandler quote, where he said someone would come up to Raymond Chandler and say the movies ruined your books, and he'd go up to a bookshelf and say, no, the books are still there. But so I think he
used to say that.
He used. Oh no, this is the point where he stopped saying that, and
now he doesn't have the book on his shelf anymore.
Okay.
He's pointed out he doesn't have copies of Watchmen in his house anymore. And to some degree that's been tainted.
That's so weird and sad, but
I think it can be understandable if it's
understandable. I'm not. Totally understandable. I'm just unfortunate. It's just really sad and unfortunate.
It is. I think so. It is. I absolutely agree.
It mainly. in my head, I always thought that when your article came out and mainly about the V for Vendetta adaptation, like it felt like a dam bursting because I mean, I forget in the article, do they mention the lawsuit? Is that really the thing to it? 'Cause,
He talked about the lawsuit afterwards, like having a curse on it, and then the lawsuit existing.
I don't know if that actually came up in that interview. I'll have to check. I
okay.
don't think so. I think that came later.
I thought it was like a dam bursting from like little things like vowing never to work for DC and then Wildstorm getting bought, and
Yes,
how
that I'm sure. I think the big one was Joel Silver was saying Alan's all on board with this. I think,
yeah.
and that's just another Hollywood producer lying. But it's the kind of thing that a lot of people would think, what you expect. But Alan clearly didn't expect that. Didn't want that. Maybe it was the straw that broke back because obviously he'd had lots of issues over the years, and this was the one where he goes, right, I'm pulling League from DC. I'm taking my name off all the books. So yeah, that might have been the moment
because it definitely came up as quite a flood, absolutely. And I was on the other end.
The narrative that he was complaining about stuff seems just very unsympathetic and not really. It just doesn't make sense. You're not just talking about someone who is being screwed over on creative rights, but you're also talking about someone time and time prove it again to be the master of the medium, where his name is on multiple titles that are frequently considered the best comic books ever made.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Any other medium, no one would say like, oh, you're being a prima donna about this.
No, yes, that's very true. But also, it's because I think certain things are expected of comic book creators by the comic book publishers, which were not expected in other media, which Alan wasn't happy about. And so it's not that his objections were unreasonable, but objections were unreasonable to that specific industry, who had not been used to this kind of thing and had different ways of working with them. And you can certainly see certain people benefited very much from Alan's decision to repeatedly walk. You look at someone like Neil Gaiman, DC. There's a very much moment where DC clearly go, yeah, we're not going to let what happened with Alan happen with Neil.
Okay.
So let's come up with a different deal. And also, Neil is one of the world's best businessmen and negotiators, but he gets residuals off the use of the Sandman trademark. Sandman was a trademark that DC created in the 1940s. Now that's impressive. Anyone who can get a company like Warner's to basically cut you in on a share of a pre-existing trademark, that's impressive. So, but that he would not have got that if it hadn't been for Alan going, no, I'm off. And DC clearly going, yeah, we can't let that happen again.
That's a good point.
I mean, it has happened again a few times, but this scenario, the landscape is far better because people like Alan, and principally Alan, took a specific stand at a specific point and went, no.
Again, just very unfortunate.
But again, you say it's unfortunate, but for
so many people, it really was fortunate by him doing that. I mean, it's just turning down lots of money, which is, as you said, I think Hollywood aren't really used to. He did actually benefit all sorts of people.
So if they just, I mean, let's just say Warner's did everything Alan asked, that would have been a rule for him and nobody else. The next person comes and goes, and it goes back to rule zero. But because he took that stand, and they had to make changes for everybody else who came along. So again, it's almost like he took one for the team. You know what I mean?
I want to rewind real quickly back. I think one of to my mind, the best adaptation I've seen of Alan Moore is the Justice League Unlimited episode of For the Man Who Has Everything. I forgot it was written by James DeMatteis.
Yes. Well, again, someone who actually respected the original. That always helps.
Yes.
The comic book writer adapting it. Yes, it's a lovely short story, and it's beautifully done. And again, it's told well. There are certain aspects of the comic book. I mean, it's the bit where you have like Superman moving very, very fast towards Mongol at a super speed, absolutely enraged, and that's beautifully done that's beautifully done in the comic book, and it's well realized in the adaptation as well, because it's quite tricky to do that kind of thing, that kind of huge amount of movement and power and speed in a comic book, a static medium. So it was nice to see those little just the little things that he used in a medium that's very bad for that kind of thing, and just he's clearly doing this. Let's just do that in the film. And so yeah, it's a lovely adaptation. You're right.
It takes so little in this regard to be a good adaptation. One part of it is having respect for the story you're adapting, I guess. Do you have, but back to V for Vendetta, do you have strong opinions on the movie, the finished movie?
Because I think it's beautiful. I think it is weird. It goes off into it's stuff. Actually, I have no problem with changing the comic book to fit the movie or to fit the new medium, but it just has such weird choices. It's the alliteration things that was going to stick out for me as being just, that just sounds so weird. It's like you're trying to be more verbose. I mean, V for Vendetta is a fairly verbose book anyway. Oh, so what you're going to do, you make it even more verbose when you turn it into a film. That's strange. I think some of the performances are astonishing. I think Roger Allen is one of his best for Cabin Pressure, at least. I mean, it's. I think this is one of the issues Alan and I know had. It was very much, this is the American take on the British story, and so a lot of the stereotypes used are the American stereotypes. It's the Benny Hill moment. That's what was going to get me, because Benny Hill only exists because of American tastes. That was a TV show that was cancelled, that was saved by American buyers who loved it, and they kept pumping it out until it died its eventual inevitable death. So to put that aspect, the yakety sax sped up stuff in the middle of it, it's because we're doing a British thing now. This is a British thing, and no, that's the British thing that the Americans like. And every British person I sort of think, that just doesn't work. Things like those aspects of that, I think, and it spread out through the film. It's again, you're talking about what's V for Vendetta about. It's about fascism versus anarchy, and film is not that.
Yeah,
the film has a very different. It's this thing in the book, in the comic. V is not a good guy. He is a guy with a specific point of view,
and he drives Evie insane. Yeah.
He is anarchy. He's an anarchist to the extreme. In a way that he's the equivalent of Ozymandias, which is much more discussion about the actions of Ozymandias, justified or not, kind of thing. But there's less about V, because it's much more of a rollicking. We enjoy the actions of V far more than we enjoy the actions of Ozymandias. So as a result, we're much more likely to want to defend V than we are Ozzy. But they're both acting, but both amoral people
acting on their own specific ideology.
Do you? Alan Moore says he hasn't seen any of these movies, but I believe him. But also his critiques have been pretty. They're the reason I haven't watched them. Like him saying that is the butcher a parable.
He saw the script of V for Vendetta. I know that was definitely sent to him because he's commented on that and he's talked about specific aspects. And when he's commented on them, I thought, well, that's clearly terrible. That won't be in the film. And then it's in the film, and you go, okay, so yeah, they just did it anyway. So that's the thing. Alan actually critiqued the script for them before they made it, and he pointed out some of the most ludicrous examples. And then it doesn't matter, did it anyway.
Okay.
So that literally is we literally don't care. I think it was things about using the postal service, using the word federal in the postal service when that's an American term for the post, not British. Eggy in a basket.
That's the one that's on Wikipedia. Yeah, the eggy in the basket.
There we go. Yeah, when he mentions that, I say, well, that's clearly a place filler. They just put it there. And you're clearly fussing about nothing. This is just a script. They'll get that research and get something actually in there, like French toast or something on those lines. No, it ends up being eggy in a basket. That does stick out because no British person has ever said those words. These are things that were concocted for the film that sounded a bit British. And again, but for me, the biggest example of that is the Benny Hill moment, because there's no way anyone would want to reference that at that time in any way, in order to make any kind of point, serious or not. That's not the one you do. There are other things you do. You do Basil Fawlty if you had to do anyone. It was just the things that British people actually do like, and I'm afraid Benny Hill is the British thing that Americans like. And that throughout it.
I don't think I knew you guys hated Benny Hill that much.
Well, he's just not. He just was never popular. He was never really popular. I mean, he was on. He was paid for by Americans, so it was popular anyway. There's a small fan base certainly, but it was never in America. It's huge. It's ridiculous. He got his money from America, and there's a few things like that. Ways I could point out things like "Are You Being Served" was very popular in the States. On the other hand, it works the other way around. Baywatch was cancelled in the States after the first season, but thankfully those good old British people, we love Baywatch, so we paid for the rest of it.
I did not know that.
Baywatch was funded by ITV from season 2 onwards because it had been cancelled in the States. So it's our fault. So so America, you may thank us for Baywatch, and we can thank you for Benny Hill. So it all works out.
When you go through the IMDb, a lot of things that come up after this point are like vague things that he contributed to, like a mythology of. There's like Green Lantern animation things. Spawn is mentioned on his IMDb.
I can't remember. A lot of that is basically stuff that he's. Sometimes a lot of that is just like a thanks to, like just for inspiration. He'll turn up in like Kevin Smith things, as just because Kevin Smith wanted to acknowledge his influences, so he'll appear in those kind of ways. But you're right, if any kind of character, he did the tiniest bits of Green Lantern comic books, I'm sure you know, and every single one of those characters spun off into huge long events or miniseries or series afterwards, because people just love those those little moments that you mentioned. Oh no, that's something. I was just thinking about this the other day. So Russell T Davies definitely ripped off the Doctor Who. It was just like you mention a whole bunch of cool sounding names, and then some point down the line, 3 or 4 years later, you actually bring one of those things back, or like Stephen Moffat does, or whatever like that. You could just say the Medusa Cascade in one episode, and then 4 years later, you might find out what it was, because at the time you don't know. So Alan does lots of that. When he's looking at the future of the Green Lantern universe, he just throws in a bunch of really cool sounding words. And 20, 30 years later, Jeff Johns goes, right, let's do a big event around one of these.
I was going to bring up Blackest Night, because I remember Alan Moore reading an interview around the time. He's just like, that was a throwaway line.
Well, there was a whole bunch of these things, and that's the other thing about Alan, is that when he does those throwaway lines, they just sound so good and sound so cool that if you're a person in that position, you can't just help yourself but go, well, what is that? Let's find out. Let's create a new series about those 2 words, because they just sound so cool, and I want to have a go.
Do we need to do some stuff on Killing Joke? The animated version.
Okay, because it has, again, Killing Joke bits turn up all over the place. But yes, you're right. I mean, do you know what? It's generally fine. It's just weird that they decided they had to put all the Batgirl stuff at the beginning,
okay,
or the prelude stuff to it. I can totally understand the idea of putting in the Oracle stuff at the end and making a much bigger story. You could adapt some of the first stories of Oracle if you want to go for the length and put those at the end of Killing Joke, because that kind of works as a counter to Killing Joke. But the stuff at the beginning really didn't. It was very odd, and it felt perfunctory and pointless. I mean, it's not the Animal's best story in the world ever. It's just a lot of Killing Joke, I think, is down to it's a very, very beautiful told story by Brian Bolland. Some of the specific aspects. I don't think it's the way his art style was used in that. I think of specific things about Joker's fingers in Batman's cowl, pulling it off his face. It's just from this such a simple thing that just really hadn't been done in the comics before. And it was beautifully done because Brian, you get to see every stitch and every seam. And something, as Stan Lee once said to me, all superhero comics are just an excuse for people to draw naked people. It's like Greek athletes, it's all that kind of stuff. So everyone's performing naked, and you just paint. So all these superhero suits just painted on. And when Brian does it, he doesn't paint things on. You actually get to see the proper costumes. And so they can actually be pulled off the face. They can be tugged down. Such a simple thing that hadn't been done before. And so, again, it's using that kind of art style really helped when you're doing that kind of scene in Killing Joke. And that's not replicated in the animation. Because it's a lot harder, but those kind of little details about how superheroes work on the page, that was challenged in Killing Joke, and in the animation it was just done in the same style as all the other animations. I would say so. There's, I would say it's fine, and it's got, but that beginning is really weird, and they should maybe just have some more ending instead, because I could definitely see you continuing it into a story about Barbara Gordon gaining her agency, becoming Oracle, and finding a new way to be. That would be the way. If I was in charge, and I was told it had to be 90 minutes, that's how I would have gone.
Okay.
But, it's weird.
I guess the Batgirl sex stuff, I just heard about it and I was like, I checked out. when the Joker movie came out, Alan Moore's critique of Killing Joke came up in my brain a lot, where like he kept, Alan Moore's critique of his own story is that the Joker is not a real person. You will never see this person. And I guess so many people are responding to the Joker movie as like mental illness being a superpower, like it makes you more powerful somehow. And I just kept thinking of Alan Moore talking about Killing Joke after the movie came out.
I can see that. Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of inspiration of Killing Joke in the Joker, definitely. The way the characters are portrayed, and I think that's a strong take on it. These aren't real characters. These aren't real people. People will not behave like this. I guess one of the things I really like about Killing Joke is that's its main central point. It's that Jim Gordon is the normal person going through trauma, specifically put up on him by the Joker to turn Jim Gordon into a Batman or into a Joker or into something, and he doesn't, because normal people don't do that. And that's the Killing Joke right there. Is the all this stuff is just fantasy, all this, but people don't. This is not how people behave, not in real life. And in the Joker film, it's like, no, clearly that is what happens. You do paint your face and you go onto a national chat show and shoot the people in the head. It's because it's that gap between fantasy and reality. People, I guess, you can look at it as a critique of like, it's gritty, realistic superhero films or stories where something terrible happens to the person and they go out and put on a costume and fight crime. And the grittier and realer it is, the better it is. But Killing Joke does kind of point out that no, that's not the gritty image at all. If you want a real story about mental illness, so you can see it as, I mean, again, Alan's not a fan of it. I can see why after all these years and stuff, but I definitely see it as a far more damning superhero critique than Watchmen is.
Speaking of Watchmen, has he said anything about the HBO show?
No, I mean, again, he hasn't seen it. I mean, obviously, he hasn't even got anything to watch it on, as far as I'm aware. I don't believe he has. It's just another thing. I don't think he'll separate it in his mind from the movie.
Okay. Damon Lindelof said he wrote him a note, and then and said, "I'm not going to say what's in the note and whether or not I got cursed after the note." But
yeah, I have no idea if he got it. See, I certainly that's never come up. Again, I don't speak to him a lot, and people have to know who speak to him. No, they haven't. That's never come up. Maybe he got it. It's not hard for him not to get, but he does get a lot of mail. That's the other thing. He's in the phone book. It's not hard. If you really want to send Alan Moore a letter, you can. He probably gets quite a bit.
Okay, well, I'm going to go check out the phone book after we're done recording. The Watchmen's, I'm not a huge fan of the Snyder one, but at least this is something where the respect comes into the adaptation.
Oh, but again, there's some aspects of it I really enjoy. I mean, there's certain pieces I'll pick out and go, that's just beautiful. Everyone will talk about the montage at the beginning. I think it's a beautiful way of showing certain scenes. And again, it's doing stuff that's not in the comic book, but it's finding a really good way to do something to tell that story. And I actually prefer the things, I guess, in this movie that aren't so slavishly taken from the comic book, because they have their own life. And they don't just have to be slowed down for no apparent reason. And I mean, again, there's I do enjoy a lot of stuff about Zack Snyder as a filmmaker, but to specifically make choices that in Watchmen to have them glorifying the violence feels like, well, that missed the point. There's that scene where Dan Lawyer fighting first of all, they're fighting the muggers, and they are being just as violent and as vicious and as bone-breaking as Rorschach ever is in the rest of the film. And for me, that says, well, what's the difference between a Night Owl Silk Spectre and Rorschach? There's none. And one of the points of Watchmen was there was meant to be a difference. But in the film, there's nothing. They're just as vicious and as violent as each other. And that always struck me as such a weird choice to take. But, it looks cool, I guess. It's just, it just kind of fights against one of the central dynamics of the film, that there are different people with different personalities who have different choices. And they do the exact same thing in the film.
I think one of the things I did admire about it was I used to be obsessed with the Watchmen adaptation. I would buy old scripts, older scripts off eBay, and at least like you didn't have that opening film within a film where they were at the Statue of Liberty, or constantly finding different ways of covering Dr. Manhattan, or constantly changing the ending.
Quite liked the Sam Hamm ending, the universe has been changed, well, what do we do now? I quite like that. I thought it was quite a fun ending.
I think I read that
to
one.
get rid of Manhattan and to be selling in our world. I thought that was quite fun. It was different the comic book and the film as well.
I guess I didn't pick
I
up
quite
on
liked
it.
it.
I just thought it was like a Superman flying around the Earth type thing where it just reset everything. I didn't even catch
No,
our.
well, no, it's they stopped the Manhattan experiment from happening in the first place. So Doctor Manhattan never exists,
Okay.
and so we get our own world back. And so, but except for them, so it's just them standing. I think it was Times Square, and the world is not their world. There are no zeppelins in the sky. It's ours. But now they're here. So what the hell are these people going to do in a world that has no idea who they are? I quite like that. I thought it was a fun way of doing it. It's a different take, but I thought it was quite an enjoyable one.
Sam Hamm's is a great screenwriter. I just feel like he was being given edicts from someone else on this, but
I'm sure that's true. And of course, again, we see the screenplay. We have no idea what the film would have looked like,
right?
Because it goes through all sorts of journeys.
Yeah, I didn't write down the directors, but like over the years, it was like what Terry Gilliam, David Hayter, Aronofsky at one point, right? Or not? Paul Greengrass. Who else? I'm blanking right now.
No, those ones that come to mind. They did go through quite a few. I can't think of anyone else in there.
The Greengrass one would have been kind of interesting, at least.
Oh, I think they'd all have been interesting to some degree, if purely from an analytical fashion. I'd definitely been fascinated. I would be fascinated by a Michael Bay version of Watchmen. I just want to see that.
Sorry, so I'm stuck thinking about that now.
Because these are the choices to be made. But I look through his Alan Moore's work. I sometimes think, if you were going to do an adaptation, wouldn't you do Bo Jeffries' saga?
I don't think I've read Bo Jeffries' saga.
It's the third Warrior strip.
Okay.
Along with the V for Marvel Man and Bo Jeffries' saga, with Steve Parkhouse, and it's.
Wait, is this the female protagonist?
No, you're about to think of Halo Jones.
Halo Jones. I'm thinking of Halo Jones.
The Bo Jeffries saga is basically Alan Moore's version of the Munsters or the Addams Family in a.
Did he draw this?
No, he didn't draw this. Steve Parkhouse did this.
Oh, sorry.
He wrote it, and it appeared in Warrior alongside the Vendetta of Marvel Man, and it was wonderful. It's a comedy. It's a sitcom. With a strange twist. It's all of Alan's fantasy and horror and sci-fi things that he loves in film and books, but they're all living in this knockdown terraced house in Northampton, trying to get by in Thatcher's Britain. So unemployment, but if it's trying to scam the system, various different jobs, and it's hilarious. It's funny. The first issue or story was the tax man cometh, and it's the first time someone from the local council has come by to collect the rents or the rates on the house that's owed, and according to the records, no one's been there for at least 300 or 400 years. So there's quite a lot of back payments, and it's wonderful. It's a proper full-blown sitcom. It's like with the father, the grandparents, the strange creatures in the shed, the children, the young ones, the teenagers. It's the whole big family, and it's very funny. And I'd love to have seen that. That smacks of being built to have been a TV show. So there's a few little things like that. In terms of big blockbusters, I mean, Marvel Man's just sitting there.
I've been thinking about Marvel Man a lot, especially with the MCU popularity, but how
it's been stripped for parts a bit by sometimes quite literally. I don't know if did you see the British version of Being Human?
No.
There's a comedy drama with a vampire, a ghost, and a werewolf all living as flatmates, which is a little bit Bo Jeffries, to be fair. But there's at least one scene in it which is totally utterly taken literally from Marvel Man. It's the kid Marvel Man, whatever, do the sparing someone and then going back. I'm sorry. They think I was soft for killing them, and that exact scene, beat for beat, appears in one episode of Being Human by Toby Jones. And I'm like, really? Well, I was paying homage. Those things. True Detective, just the same with Top 10. They take one of the scenes from Top 10. The season end kind of thing. So there are some things that people just go snip the scissors, and it will be fine.
Well, it's crazy.
I really like this.
Talking to you, Rich, I'm realizing like you're making points, and I'm like, where have I heard that before? I'm like, oh, I probably read that on Bleeding Cool at some point.
You probably did read it on Bleeding Cool. Yeah, I may be recycling myself.
I remember
I'm skipping my own stuff.
the True Detective one in particular. Like after that came out, I went back and reread it and was like, wow. But yeah, that's what happens when you're so influential.
Okay, like if Alan Moore won't let his work be adapted, well, damn it, we're going to do it anyway. We're going to take the bit that we like and we're going to do it, and no one can say anything, and no one will know what it is because not enough people read his stuff. So we'll just get it through the editors, and no one will care.
And no one's going to actually adapt the source material anymore.
Yeah, I guess.
See, the one that gets the respect level the most still to me is the HBO show, Watchmen show. Like that's.
I did enjoy it. I definitely enjoyed it. I like the fact that it did something different. It went. It took a different story. It was going in a different direction. It had something different to say, I guess. And it took on the whole Black Lives Matter propaganda as a aspects of American society as part of its DNA. And I thought that was very interesting. And I hadn't seen that done that well on television at that point. Quite a few people have kind of caught up a bit since then. But at that time, I thought that was a fantastic bit of work. So it's very enjoyable. I mean, it's arguable to say how much Watchmen was it, and again, again Ozymandias is really weird in that show. There's so much aspects of that.
Yeah,
that's just all. There are aspects of that show which I just think are absolutely awful, and they mostly involve Ozymandias. But then they are also the kind of batshit crazy kind of stuff that I quite like when I don't know, Pennyworth does it, which I utterly adored. And that has no base, that's no relationship to any kind of reality whatsoever. But it's really enjoyable. So again, so certain aspects of, I guess, the Watchmen TV show, HBO Watchmen, I definitely enjoyed. But again, but generally there were the parts of them that weren't actually Watchmen. They did do that lovely little trick. Spoilers here, but I was very impressed by the scene where it's the someone who's it's Manhattan in different times and asking the question, "How did you know about this?"
Oh, the second to last episode.
Now.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, there we go. That I love that. I didn't know about it. I mean, I know about it now. That was very clever. He knows about it now. That was just one of those little moments of a self-causal loop that I really enjoyed. But that replicated some of the aspects of Watchmen. I guess the self-causing bits, the loops that I really enjoyed when reading it. That was a very satisfying loop within that entire TV show.
It goes back to what you were saying about the adaptation of. You were specifically talking about the costumes, but just like making it work in a different medium. Just like the clockwork like structure, like all the details coming into it. Like it proved that you can do that on film in a way.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I was impressed with that aspect to it.
I thought it was very enjoyable. I don't, Alan won't watch it. Also, it's one of those things because Damon Lindelof is so inspired by Alan Moore.
Right.
So clear. He goes on about it all the time, and he's adapted the work, and he knows that Alan hates it. And also Alan really the TV show that Alan has given the most disdain for publicly is Lost. So. It's like to have that. I mean, that can't be. I mean, I feel sorry for that. I mean, obviously, he's got all the acclaim. So many people love his work and will tell him day in, day out. But something inside him knows that Alan Moore doesn't like his work and knows his name and really doesn't like what he's done. That can't be nice. Poor fella. I can't. I don't envy him that. That's a shame. Because clearly the man loves Alan's work so much.
Yeah.
And it's been very interesting. We actually talked about this. The direct influence of Watchmen on other media. It's how American television show format that you get on things like Netflix or HBO in general, it bears a lot of its structure to Watchmen. And that's because Lost took things from Watchmen. And everyone's done things like the idea that you have not only have episodes that have to be watched in a very specific order, but there are entire flashback episodes within that. So, episode 5 will be a flashback episode to well beyond. And now that's a standard way of doing things. I was watching that in the new series of Mythic Quest. And it was very enjoyable. But that was what you really only saw that on TV the first time in Lost. And Lost took that from Watchmen when you have the Manhattan episode specifically. And so but that's not the way it's done now. I mean, you have that in Squid Game. Everyone now does that as a format. If you've got like a 12 episode series, well, episode 3, episode 4, we'll take all the characters, go back to see what they were years before the show starts.
So you
And
mean
then,
you mean like every other episode being a flashback is what you're.
not so much every other, but you will have one or two episodes that will not, the main plot will not progress at all. Instead, you'll flashback and you will learn more about the characters.
Okay.
Forward with that information. And that really hadn't been done on television until Lost.
Right.
And Lost took that lock stock from Watchmen.
Yeah.
But now it's the one does it. So you can see that kind of influence of one medium on another.
Well, all this has been prelude to us talking about the show, which I've been excited about. We've been talking about this just because Alan Moore's clearly influenced by film. He's talked about doing it. All these adaptations have happened that have gone awry. And what would happen if he actually had control or actually decided to put himself into making a film? And we finally got the answer with the first 5 short films, the Showpieces
series. The Showpieces.
There's Act of Fate, Upon Reflection, Jimmy's End, A Professional Relationship, and His Heavy Heart.
And there's also
then there are others. Yeah, I mean, Hungry Heart is the other.
So the Showpieces films, which were made over a number of years, whenever they kind of got the funding for it and got the ability to put them together.
I've been waiting for years for Alan Moore cinema, basically, and I got to be honest, I was underwhelmed. I think I don't remember if it was Jimmy's End or Act of Faith was the first one I saw. Which was the first one was released?
Well, they put out Act of Faith and Jimmy's End together. I know because I was in the screening at St James End Working Men's Club. I was in the place where it was filmed.
Wow.
Watching it, which is also when I went to the toilets afterwards. I was sat at the urinals, and the guy who played the clown, the actor, walks in and stands next to me, and I just feel like that's the most secret cinema moment I've ever had in my life. It's like that. So to some degrees, I can't watch that film without thinking of those strange moments of watching it. It's I agree. I did enjoy them, but I can see why some people didn't, and I thought they were I was showing a bit too much David Lynch inspiration. Things like the Twin Peaks is definitely strongly there, which I know Alan doesn't like saying or comparing. He isn't different. I had a big argument with my fellow Bleeding Cool writer at the time, Brendan Connolly, which that was kind of the way he'd taken it. I saw it much more as like, this is the British franchise of the Black Lodge. And I didn't realise how accurate it was, because here's the other weird thing. The show, while clearly a continuation of the Pieces, is a very different beast, because the Show Pieces films are deliberately disturbing and horrible, and they're gross. They're there to try and get into your skin and make you feel dirty. And the film is, to some degree, it's almost call it the Watchmen film. No, it takes those aspects that you're aware of, and it totally integrates them. But it's something very different. It turns it into a comedy. It's a the film is much more of a comedy drama. It's funnier, it's weirder, it's lighter. But all the aspects of Showpieces are underlining it. So in some ways, like, Showpieces is the underworld to the show. So all this stuff is going on underneath the streets in this kind of hellish dimension that's been created, and we get to find out. That's it. We get the origin. We get to find out what's going on. The show what the show is making sense of Showpieces. So it's all the weird fucked up stuff of Showpieces is there in the show, but it's much more of but this is why. So we get an actual narrative. We get something that makes more sense. So in the way that the Showpieces were more about feeling, I guess, or the way they made you feel, the show is more of an intellectual exercise. Like, well, why? What's actually going on? Let's get the plot. And we get it. And for someone like me, I loved it, because that's just the kind of stuff I like. I like to find out why all this stuff happens. I love the continuity of it all. I want to know who happened, why is this going on? Why are some people going to this place and others not? Who are these people? Are they God? Are they the devil? Are they working class comedians? And you get the whole thing laid out for you. And you basically get, the show is very much like a Bible, I think, for the show. So you can totally, again, watch it without having to see any other Showpieces. But if you watch Showpieces, if you can get through Showpieces, however you see it, you get a much greater enjoyment from the show and understanding of what the show is.
and I have no idea what it looks like.
Well, the trick of it is I've forgotten so much of. I think I only saw the Jimmy's End and the first one, and I was seeing this kind of because I tried watching last night, and they're supposedly on Shudder, but not in America. Or at least I couldn't find them.
No, and also they only do 3 of them in the streaming thing. Because there's like I said, there's 5 films, and they only put out Faith, Keeping Faith, Jimmy's End, and Hungry Heart as a triple.
Okay.
They don't do upon reflection and professional relationship, which again, professional relationship is one of my favorites because that is the lowest budget. It's just Match Bright and Matterton in a dressing room, and they're rearranging, talking and rearranging Scrabble letters, which are only the letters of DNA being constantly rearranged into different words, letters, and meanings. And I think it's a bit like what he did with Promethea with all the anagrams, and that's really fun.
That's what I was thinking. I was going to say that's a more wordplay thing. Like I was thinking of.
Oh, it's thoroughly wordplay. It's one of the more wordplay things he's done. So you get those things, but they're basically telling about a horrible place that is going on, an afterlife, which is not like any afterlife that you may be aware of, although it has certain similarities to some Judeo-Christian traditions and some Egyptian traditions as well. And then the film, it kind of like says, that's happening because of this. And you've basically kind of got like a localized hell. It's just a hell just for Northampton. I love that. I mean, I love the idea that maybe every city could have one. We could all have our own little local, because hell has always been portrayed as this kind of huge, big thing for all of humanity to suffer for. All those different levels and things, but all of humanity go that. And I love the idea you could have a hell that's just
in each town.
Yeah, and properly, and I guess that's how you could spin off into the just that people have created these things that are just for the people, just for local people, or if you were passing through, and the idea that you're stuck where you are. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the sitcom Ghosts.
You know what? I've heard you talk about it, but no, I haven't.
Yeah. Well, it's a sitcom where all the people there are people who have lived in that house over the last few thousand years, and they can't leave because this is where they died. So they can find a way to move on. You're stuck where you are, and with the people you are. All great sitcoms are about the people you are stuck with and you can't leave, whether that be workplace or families or prison or whatever. And Ghosts does that really well, and it's that aspect I think which is in the show because it's you can't leave. You're stuck here. You can't move on.
You know, I'm going to throw this at you. One of the things I was thinking of when watching this, having a kind of substantial prequel or setup, and then your main meat, if you want to call the short films the prequels.
Okay.
And
that's fair enough. I think you can.
I was thinking of Neonomicon and Providence.
That's you could definitely do that. You could even go for Courtyard as well. Because really,
Courtyard's probably a better one then in that regard.
Yeah, because there were really because I think when you have like Providence and Neonomicon, I think there's a knowledge when he's writing Neonomicon of what Providence would be. But in Courtyard, I think that was just off the cuff. I think I was just like, this is a fun little take on H.P. Lovecraft. And then he thinks about it a bit longer. He goes, well, maybe he could continue and go on to these things. And I think we know how the show was kind of created. It was initially just a few words that Alamo was jotting down to help a guy who's putting together a burlesque video. That's what it began.
I was going to ask him Mitch Jenkins' background too. Like he's a photographer and a video director before he started jumping.
That's right. That's absolutely. And he'd been doing some stuff with Dodge and Logic, the magazine that Alamo was doing. And it was just like he's doing a video of some of the burlesque dancers who appear in Dodge and Logic. And could Alan maybe write a few words to help make sense? And he ends up writing a lot more. And you've now got 6 short films and a movie and a 5-season planned television show with the first episode fully scripted. So when you work with Alan Moore, you are playing with live ammunition. You never know where it's going to go off. It's going to hit someone. You never know what the consequences might be.
What I was watching the movie thinking of the TV show because you mentioned on the article you posted on his birthday Thursday all this stuff about the 5 seasons, and I remember you mentioned before, and that was what I was like, just the fact that it still can expand and just it was a world,
Yeah, and that's what I think the film does. You get to see tiny little bits of this world. The fact that all the brand names are different, all the different builds businesses, there's huge stuff going on. you get to see little glimpses of clearly what is a much wider world. And I think I like that. There's a lot of films that I like. I think it's Patrick Williams calls them gonzo blockbusters, where you get to see fully created worlds, you get little bits of it, and a lot of people find it really unsatisfying, especially because usually the characters and the acting is generally crap. Things like Mortal Engines or Valerian, those kind of movies where Jupiter's Rising, which again are often heavily criticised, but I utterly adore. And a lot of the time it's because of those. I get to see glimpses of a world, and then I get to create the rest of it in my head, and I love that kind of stuff. And I get that with the show. Again, most of these films have got far too huge big budgets that will never make back. I think Fifth Element's probably the only exclusive one that did.
I mean, if Alan Moore is anything, he's an adult world builder. Like yeah. Well, the reason I thought of Providence though is structurally the show has like a structure where it feels like an outsider. You're a cipher into the world building, and he's investigating, trying to find it out. Only Providence kind of ended in a more apocalyptic way, and the show, at least, at least like, it felt a little better at the end. But
well, it was certainly an ending. Yes. Yes, we Providence very much. I mean, I love the way. I love how it's all everything is a prequel to what's really coming. All the Thunders and Enomicon stuff. It all becomes, this is terrible things going to happen. It's just a prequel to them all happening. So and it's just like Lovecraft is like seen as I guess a prophet of the future rather than a telling of the past and stuff. I thought that was I really, really enjoyed that aspect to it.
I guess I mean, going into the film,
the show, yeah.
It starts out with the possessory credit is Alan Moore and Mitch Jenkins. They share it together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any idea how much Alan Moore? I mean, he was acting in it. He wrote it. He's an executive producer on some of the shorts. How much would he have been around for? Was he through all pre-production and post-production? You think?
I'm. What do I know? What do I know? What do I think? I mean, he was obviously always on set. No, I don't think he'll have been around for a lot of the editing and stuff. I mean, he'll have been there, but it would have been a constant presence. If I'm correct, I think that's right. I mean, Mitch Jenkins, Alan Moore respects Mitch as a filmmaker.
Okay.
So he wouldn't have to be on his. It's just like if you work with an artist, you're not actually having to stand over their shoulder. You're working with people you respect, and basically you kind of let them get on with it, and you'll be told if there's any issues. And usually with Alan, it's just probably just do whatever.
This goes back to my thing I was making earlier about writers and pencilers, where but at the same time, I'm curious. I think part of the reason I was underwhelmed with the shorts, but the movie worked for me for the most part. But I still think that I want to see Alan Moore and Mitch Jenkins master the medium a little more, because I mean, one of the things
I think that's fair. That's fair because it's like these are all your first stabs into a medium.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Exactly.
No one is basing Alan Moore's entire career on Maxwell the Magic Hat.
Fair point. I guess
very good. I still enjoy this.
Whenever I look at Alan Moore at his heights or my favorites of his, there's a part of me that thinks of him as the master formalist, and the movie version of that to me is Kubrick, and those were my two favorite go-tos as a teenager. Okay. And so half of Alan Moore's stuff for me is it's so formal until a stylistic tick comes into it, and then that stylistic tick is very justified by the story, and it expands what the story is in a beautiful way. That's why I want to see him master the medium, and I hope a TV show would do 5 seasons of a TV show might get him closer to that.
Yeah, that's very, very possible. And odds are he'd probably write the whole damn thing as well. So yeah, I mean that's what he's doing for the next 5 years. Yeah, I mean it as far as I understand, it is out to people. Obviously there's a how it would get made, but I believe the streaming services are being approached and are welcome to being approached. And I honestly think it's going to come down to someone at Netflix or Apple or Prime or whatever who really, really liked Alan Moore stuff when they were 15 or 16, and suddenly they get the chance to sign off on one. That could well be the exact thing that happens. I don't know.
One of the tricks I did to get into the movie too, which was very helpful, seeing as I'm so used to reading Alan Moore, I turned on subtitles.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Also, I know it's also it's in an English accent. It might not be a totally familiar English accent. I don't think I needed them, but that's quite an interesting way of doing it. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I've certainly watched a lot more stuff of subtitles. We've got growing up with kids. When the kids were younger, we always put the subtitles on to help their reading. But
I've been watching more stuff with subtitles lately. It's helpful, but it just a lot of the details of the world came out more. Like, and
you turned it into a comic book, didn't you?
It is exactly what I was doing. That is exactly what I was doing. Precisely.
You adapted it to a comics.
I just kept putting pause on and seeing it as a caption.
All right, I'll tell you this. This is something which just made me think about is that it's often been said that comic books are the medium that engages your left brain and your right hand side brain at the same time because you're watching and you're reading simultaneously.
Uh-huh.
The only other example of that is a subtitled movie. And so it could be that you actually did recreate more of what you've experienced when reading an Alan Moore comic book by turning the subtitles on than just being able to read his words. It might have actually tapped into the way you actually do enjoy a really good comic and maybe a really good Alan Moore comic.
No, that's also again going back to the mastery of the medium. Like half the dream stuff it felt the movie. Alan Moore's an amazing writer, but the movie felt so crammed and writerly, but in a good way. But at the same time, I needed to read it. So then, and then there were moments where like I probably, if I wasn't reading, could have fallen more into the film a little, engaged with it. As much as I know I really liked it, but I mean, I kept pausing and writing down the different phrases just because that's what I'm used to. Like little things on the side of the shop. My favorite was the escapism or the car sign that said "I break for poignant memories." Like I just kept pausing and writing stuff like that down. But
that's the stuff I know. That's the stuff that I knew I'd enjoy, but I go back for a second viewing for that.
Well, and so I also, one thing that was very helpful also, Alan Moore stuff is I love reading it for the first time, but Alan Moore stuff is almost always better reread. So I watched it again this morning, and
you'll pick up aspects you might not have missed the first time. That's the usual way. I still do that with Watchmen. There's every now and then there's little bits, and I don't think I remember that. I didn't notice that the first time. The Sugar Cube Trail, things like that. I remember picking up that a long time after.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the great things of a maximalist writer. Like there's so I want to see him nail it in a way. You know what I mean? Where like, yeah, I keep saying this. I just want him to do 5 seasons of this.
Yeah, 5 seasons in a movie. We just got the movie first, so yeah, that works for me.
Reverse Community.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my favorite gags in the whole thing was the 2 Tims, the detectives.
I was just thinking about that. So, are you going to talk about the detectives? Yes, that's very, very funny and very, very silly. It is the silliest thing in that film, and it is beautiful. And it does speak to a much darker, weirder. How do they get to that situation where they do this? Isn't this weird? Isn't this wild? And everybody else treats them as absolutely to be respected, except the other people in the waiting room. This is not a joke to anybody. Because
they have the waiting room is in color, but when they go inside the office, that's when it turns to black and white.
Yes. But it also reminds me, and this is I don't know how much it reminded me more than anything of, I guess, 1950s, 60s, 70s British comic books where you would like the kids anthologies, things like the Beano or the Dandy or the Beezer, where you would have these kind of characters, and in those kind of structures, it would be quite acceptable to have 2 tiny detectives who stand on each other's shoulders and become a big size detective, and to be running their own little mini I Spy, Private Eye kind of thing.
The second gag I thought of the BoJack Horseman character, Vincent Adult Man.
Yes, there you go. I'd forgotten that. Yes, you're right. There is a certain, I think, he's kind of creating that kind of weird, innocent, slightly innocent, but batshit craziness that when we were kids, we totally accept. That's absolutely fine. And then you're looking at the adult eye and you go, well, in what world would these people have any actual respect? Why are people sitting in the waiting room to see these people? what led here? And I love that stuff. I was totally bowled over that, and I want to see more. I want to see the TV series because we're going to get the flashback episodes. I tell you, it's like birth. I want to go on. How do we get here? Or maybe we never will. It remains some eternal mystery we could all debate about.
I was also thinking the Jackie Quick stuff from America's Best Comics, the kid stuff. Like.
Well, again, that Jackie Quick absolutely based around those kind of high concept comics like Roger the Dodger or the original Dennis the Menace, things like that.
And so many good throwaway jokes too in there too, which the whole movie has so many good throwaway jokes.
Yes, absolutely, and also because it's an Alan Moore thing and it's set in Northampton, he gets to dump all the Northampton stuff he's been going on about in every interview and everything for years. He gets a character who's a tourist guide and so gets to talk about Northampton. Oh, you could just feel him finally, I have the chance to get this so much wider. Who
stops herself and is just like, oh, I'm doing my tour guide spiel and I didn't realize it.
Yeah, I did enjoy. Yes, it was. Yes, he definitely. Let's say he took advantage of the situation that had been presented to him to do a bit of a like a cut and paste from some things he might have been previously working on.
There's a moment at the end of the film when the Fletcher is arguing with Faith and revealing his whole thing, and she says, I'm stuck between an East End villain on one hand and a troupe of light entertainment ghouls and specters. And the thought in my head went to that really famous Captain Britain panel where he's just like, do you ever get halfway through a sentence?
Yes. That's the alternate world thing, not the omniversal kind of stuff where he's I can't believe I am, and then
there was one of those I'd seen that panel so much before I actually read the issue, and I thought the whole issue was going to be much more goofier than when I read it was like serious, and then you just have that.
That's how it works because it's in the middle of multiversal war kind of thing. So I just wondered if I had it on. I don't have it quite to hand. It's one of my other bookshelves. I can just grab it and pull it out. So, yes.
Do you know anything about?
Yes, it's.
How much of the budget for this would have been, or comparable to what, like a pilot's budget, or?
No, I don't know. I know there were some budgetary issues. I'm aware of certain scenes that had to be cut because of budget issues.
Okay.
So that would definitely be an issue. There was something I got the chance to chat to some of the cast after the screening, which was great. But there was a scene where a car gets, instead of a car just crashing, the car gets split in two by going through a telegraph pole or a lamppost or something along those lines, and so you end up having like two completely separated cars, halves of the cars, and that I believe Alan had to be told, yeah, we can't do that. I'll do something else instead. Just have the car crash.
That's not the scene at the scene at the end when Faith almost crashes the car and it just like stops right before.
I believe that you would have actually had the car split in two lengthways. And I don't know the details of that or anything else like that. That's just one thing I know was it had to go because of that. And I don't know the details, but yeah. So, but all it means is I know that there were clearly budget issues involved in this film, which isn't the worst thing. As I said, if you can't afford to show it, you can say it. You just have to be a bit more inventive, come up with other things instead to grab the audience. You just can't sometimes throw all the money on the screen, I guess.
Whereas you can in comics. In comics, you can do
everything.
Yeah.
You don't know comics.
Well, I mean, and then the opening shot kind of like tells you that's going to happen, where it starts out from the world and comes into the puddle, and then it does the puddle being like the one of those Alan Moore tricks. I think was the cover to Watchmen 4. Like, how many times has he done a thing of a reflection in a puddle or word in the puddle? But then
he likes a reflection in the puddle. Killing joke. Got to remember all the water in the puddle.
Yeah. Totally. But then the rest of the movie is so much talking heads. It's so much dialogue scenes throughout. I don't know.
Sometimes they're painted yellow, so that they're painted gold. I don't know. There's a lot of good-looking people, interesting costumes and stuff. But you're right. There's a lot of it's a heavy dialogue film. Absolutely. Yeah. To be fair, it's also an Alan Moore film, and I kind of think if you're expecting it to be light in terms of dialogue, you didn't go. You pretty weren't watching this film, I guess.
Maybe I'm just thinking in the back of my head of me being in an editing room and wanting Alan Moore's creativity to be in an editing room. How such a highly visual writer, You know, I mean, as much as wordy as those scripts are, obviously, like no one would ever accuse Alan Moore of not being visual. So
No,
that's
that's true. It may be a budgetary thing. Like I said, I know of one thing that went, and there may be others that might have gone as well. And there's also this could be an issue. I don't know if it is or not, of people being just too afraid to cut Alan Moore's dialogue because Alan Moore's dialogue.
I could totally buy that. I could totally buy that.
I mean, that every time I've had to call him up for whatever reason, I've had to phone him up, and every single time I've been so afraid in my head. Like, what if I call him in the middle of a thought? There he is. He's thinking something, and then I call him. You know the Porlock story about the albatross poem. The guy gets called up in the middle of he's writing a poem, and then someone knocks on the door. The man from Porlock Coleridge, and he loses the entire poem. And he has to write something else instead. And there's always that idea that if I call up Alan Moore, I might Porlock him. And there's the idea that, if you're editing, what's your word? Are you destroying something that you've loved so much and it's amazing? And you go, right, yeah, okay, that's all fine. We're going to get rid of all that and replace it with a shot of a lemon. I mean, I don't know. But Alan's very good at actually editing himself in the comics. Certainly, he cuts lots of his stuff out. But then, it's a lot easier for him.
Well, and that's why I think you get better if he goes along.
Because there's so much, because he has had such an effect and people got him so much goodwill and respect and stuff. It must be really hard for people who kind of like. It must be really hard for Alan to, in some ways, like kind of live up to that kind of, because he clearly doesn't feel about his own work the same way that other people work. It's there to be chopped and changed. It must be weird to be held in such reverence.
Yeah.
When you are just you, because you're just you. I'm just me. He's just him. And to have people have that kind of reverence to the stuff that you just knocked up over breakfast, that has to be weird. And I'm sure that's true about all sorts of artists and creators that once become very successful in things who, I don't know if there's imposter syndrome or Superman syndrome going on, but it must be weird to be in that kind of situation and to want people to edit and then them not doing it. I don't know.
I sometimes feel like when you're making something dreamlike in film, words are sometimes in the way of that. So that's why I think it's not that I'm okay with the wordy Alan Moore movie. The issue is more of a movie that relies so significantly on dreams and switching back and forth between reality and dreams.
Well, at least he sung some of it. There's one of those lines that if it's too silly to say it, sing it. And I'm just remembering some of the Mr. Moon song. That does stick in my head a bit, I have to say.
Well, I was going to ask, what'd you think? Because it took me a second, but I really started to dig his character's last name is Metatron, so like
Metatron is the Metatron, and Matt's Bright, so it's the voice of God and the voice of the devil. So yes,
I just think Alan Moore making himself God in this story, or just the creator of this being in.
Well, he's God, but he's not actually God. He's someone pretending to be God. So it's the pretense of God. He pretends to be God. I am the great I am, all that stuff. So he's definitely just a character who's pretending to be God, but he is pretending to be God. Now in the original shorts, he could well have been God, as well as being Metaton. So, but in the film, we find out what actually happened, and no, he isn't, but what he is instead, and that's great. I really enjoyed that. But yes, I think you're right. Alan Moore casting himself as God would sound like the utter hubris, but in the show it's very much no, it's all a pretense. It's someone pretending to be God, and that feels much more like someone pretending to be God, because of course when you're a writer, that's who you are.
No, that's exactly my point. That's because
you get to move all these puppets around, but they're not real.
On my last episode, we were talking about with my friend Keith. He was talking about Vonnegut writing himself in and talking to Kilgore Trout, stuff like that, or Philip Roth talking to his characters. Like there's something about the creator putting himself in and making himself God that just is there's levels upon levels upon levels. It's especially, and I would say I was kind of impressed. Alan Moore is a presence, and he didn't look like it. He was good in it. He was good.
Oh, he's a good actor. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was a fine actor. He was as good as any of the actors in there.
Absolutely. I knew he's a good performer, but he's a good actor. Yeah.
He fit in. It's weird to see that. Yeah, I think people have kind of grown into that. Neil Gaiman just a really nice piece in a recent Radio 4 drama here. Has played the Duke in so the name's gone, but he turns up as a character, and it's like, oh, that's really quite good. If I had known that was Neil, I'd have thought that was a fine actor. So maybe they're getting better. They've been hanging around a lot of writers and artists, producers and directors. Maybe it's rubbed off on them a little bit.
Mm. You think writers just hang out in rooms? Rich, I think...
What's the line? What's the line? Pay attention to the background. It's just the foreground trying to hide. That's in the show. I love that. That's one of my favorite lines in the show. That you were talking about the Tims. What's that? The solar panels on the roof don't pay for themselves.
Yeah,
I love that. That's what it's such an old line. Turn it into a brand new joke.
Half the two Tims narration is so amazing. There was a line I reread Alan Moore's How to Write for Comics thing a while back, just because there's a throwaway in there that talks about Raymond Chandler and how the noirs of Raymond Chandler works. And one of those lines ended up in the two Tims narration about just like being world weary and...
Oh really? Oh, you know what? I'm gonna have to find that now, because that's worth it. That's there we are. That I could probably write an entire Bleeding Cool article just about that. I need to warn you now, but I'll have to look that up. Thanks for that.
So I did want to ask you about what you know about the Alan Moore's books he just sold. The
very, very little. All I know, I have reported. It's pretty much nothing more than that. He's sold books, a series.
It's a 5-book series and a short story, or it's a short story collection. The short story collection is called Illuminations.
Yes, and then there's a series to follow that, a London set thing. Basically, as far as I can tell, it'll probably be doing to London what he's been doing to Northampton for a while. And there's there's even greater richer. I mean, I expect if you're looking for stuff to be recycled, I expect to see a lot of William Blake. I see a lot of his audio CD stuff, the hybrid working, things like that, which is set in the kind of areas of London. Okay, here we go. I see a simpatico between the show and Last Night in Soho. I think there's a similarity in take and look, the idea of the other world beneath you, or other worlds, one world affecting the other. And when I was watching Last Night in Soho, it almost felt like it felt a bit like what if the show had been directed by Edgar Wright to some degree, because there's definite similarities in tone, and I think they both talk to each other about stuff. I know there's an Edgar Wright credit in the show.
Really?
Thanks to, and I know they've talked about Edgar Wright's talked about Alan Moore, so I know there's something there. I honestly think there's a certain meeting of minds that have been expressed in these two very different films, and one's about Northampton. One is a supernatural film about Northampton. One's a
ghosts in every room in London.
Both reflecting, and then they all reflect the places they're set. So what we might be seeing with these books might be something a little bit closer to Last Night in Soho, maybe. But Alan Moore's take on it.
Do you know anything about? Is the show his only chance at making more films, or is there? I mean, if he's writing 5 books right now, I can't imagine screenplays are on his brain.
No, the only one I know of is the show, continuing the show television. And now there's been other stuff over the years that hasn't kind of gone anywhere, but that's the only thing I know about that's got that's being actively, and of course, Alan's a busy man. He's getting on a bit as well,
right?
Maybe it's the thing. Maybe he doesn't really want the TV deal to happen. I don't know, but it's certainly there. And I think, I want to see it. I really want to see the TV show, the show of the show. Oh God, that's the other thing. Are they going to have to come up with a different title to it? I mean, it's as it is. So have a movie called The Show, but have a TV show called The Show. I don't know. It starts to feel a bit Abbott and Costello. Everything I'm saying is rhyming with O. I need to stop immediately or go.
I would understand if he didn't want to, considering his experience with the film industry. I can understand if he's like, this is it, or there's very little beyond the show, but I kind of would be interested in him to master that medium too. I just want to see more. So.
Also, the thing I always every now and go back to is Big Numbers is going to be a TV show at some point.
Really?
And it all be mapped out. A lot of big chunk of it had been mapped out as a TV show for Channel 4, but it didn't happen. It was going to be basically completed as a TV show. That was the plan at one point. So more work was done on it. Anyway, it didn't happen. But I kind of get the feeling that some of that probably went into the show, maybe. and maybe we might see some of it if there was a TV show of the show. See what I mean? That we might be able to see some of that find its way in. I don't know. Maybe. This would be pure speculation on my behalf.
Pure speculation is what I asked for, and I welcome, appreciate it.
And it's also, I was talking about other weirder things coming out of the show. Siobhan Hewlett, who plays Faith, is also in the show, as well as the showpieces. She is appearing in a new film called The Lost Girls.
Really?
She's playing. I think she's playing Wendy Darling, but it's not based on the Lost Girls graphic novel. But it's using the same title, play on Lost Boys, obviously. And she's also writing, directing, and starring in a film based on a Neil Gaiman story. So, which is how when I went to see the press night for Neil Gaiman's Ocean at the End of the Lane, and we're making its West End debut the other week, Siobhan was there in the audience, so we got to meet up afterwards. And go like, hello you. So that was good. Yeah, you got a lot to live up to, haven't you? I know. So there are, these things do kind of spin off onto their own little worlds. Even if there's no TV show spin off, there are other things that will exist. The people who've come into this world don't get to leave quite as easily as they might have liked, which, that's also part of the show as well.
You come to Northampton, you'll never leave.
The only reason I knew about the West End Ocean at the End of the Lane thing was from Bleeding Cool, so
it was very, very enjoyable. I'm
good.
sure it'll come to Broadway at some point, or there'll be other versions of it.
Rich Johnston, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
I'm so glad we managed to make through technology. we found our way through to each other. It's wonderful. I really enjoyed myself. Thank you.